In a scale of 1 to 10, how joyful are you feeling this morning? So-so, some of you in the middle. You know, last week we saw how faith in Jesus as the Christ should lead all of us from being in this constant search for happiness to just being people of joy. Being people of joy because we have found in Jesus the source of happiness. Well, I don't know about you, but I feel like I have accepted Jesus pretty evidently in my life, yet I'm not always that joyful. Sometimes, for whatever the reason might be, I feel pretty angry or upset, annoyed, indifferent. I'm not always very Christ-like to others. So the question that arises is, why? If Christians hold the source of joy, why can we be so miserable sometimes? Why? I don't know how accurate this story is, but it is said that Mahatma Gandhi, he was very interested in Christianity. And he found Jesus in the Gospels. When he began reading the Gospels, he found Jesus very appealing, very attractive, especially with how Jesus was so outspoken to the injustice and discrimination of the world. Things that for Gandhi were very important, for he was doing the same thing in India. So then one day, he decides to go to a Christian church in Calcutta, one of the biggest Christian churches in Calcutta. And he wanted to see and expecting to see the Christian body of believers embodying this loving spirit of Jesus that he was experiencing in the Gospels. So he goes. But to his unpleasant surprise, he is greeted by this very moody usher at the front of the door who did not let him in because the only people that were allowed into this church were Indians of a higher caste or people who were white, none of which fit him. Now, this attitude for him didn't seem to correlate between the Jesus that he was learning in the Gospels and what he was expecting of someone who would call themselves a Christian. So later on in an interview, somebody asks him, "Gandhi, have you ever thought about being a Christian?" And he responds, "Yeah, I thought about being a Christian once, until I met one. I like your Christ, I don't like your Christians." Why? If Christians hold the source of joy, do we seem to be so miserable at times? Why? Now, it's not a trick question. It's not a mystery either. James, in that second reading, he offers us part of the answer. He asks, where do conflicts among you, Christian believers, Christian church, where do conflicts among you arise? And then immediately he answers, you covet, but you don't possess. You envy, but you cannot obtain. And so you get into fights. You wage war. You even kill. What is he referring to? Frustration. The source of conflict that James is identifying is frustration. And think about it. Think about in your own life. When do you tend to get into arguments the most, either with a spouse or a friend, a sibling, your son or daughter? When we're frustrated. When we're frustrated that something didn't go the way that we wanted. When we're frustrated that someone isn't listening or doing what we asked them to do. When we're frustrated that all of the work that we have been doing is not being recognized. Frustrated that we're being asked to do something that we don't want. Frustrated that we can't get something that we want. Frustrated that someone else seems to be doing better than we are. Frustrated that in 2015, Russell Wilson decided to throw a ball at the last 20 seconds of the game instead of just running to the touchdown, which just got intercepted, and we ended up losing the game. Frustration. I'm still pretty bitter about that one. Frustration. James identifies frustration, defines it as an uncontrolled passion. And this uncontrolled passion, he says, it's fed by jealousy and ambition. Jealousy, because we're constantly comparing ourselves to others, what they have that we don't, that frustrates us. And in ambition, We feel like we're never quite there. We don't quite have enough. We're not quite enough ourselves, and that's also frustrating. Now, one could argue that there's nothing wrong with having a little bit of jealousy and ambition in your life. One could argue that feeling a little bit of jealousy allows you to recognize that there is something of value out there or with you that you need to hold and protect. One could argue that being a little ambitious gives you a drive to get things done, to go higher. But in the Catholic understanding of sin and the human person and how we operate, jealousy and ambition, those two things are always to be rejected because they have a tendency to overpower a person. Have you ever felt jealous? Especially at the start of our relationship, jealousy creeps up right away, and at first it can be a little cute. At first it is, oh, they must really like me. They don't want to lose me. They're feeling jealous because I'm important to them. But that jealousy can consume the person with this irrational need and frustration to control the other. Unfortunately, oftentimes that just leads to this relationship that's emotionally and physically abusive sometimes. It's the same thing with ambition. At first it seems like an honorable trait that we should be inviting people to have, and we do it in subtle ways even with kids. When they do something, yeah, that was good, that was okay, but you can do better next time. You can do better next time. And before you know it, this drive of ambition gets a hold of the individual, and they grow up consumed by this irrational need to always, and frustration, to always be on top, no matter what. No matter what. If we go even deeper in the Catholic understanding of what sin is and what lies below frustration, even further, what lies below jealousy and ambition, at the root of that, the Church has discerned that in the root of that is pride and envy. Two of the 7 capital sins. Capital meaning primary. Primary meaning that these are tendencies that are deeply rooted in the human person, and these are the things that Jesus came to unveil, to reveal, to help us understand so that we may reject and with God's grace be saved, be brought out of, resurrected, new life. And that is what Jesus is clearly doing in the gospel today. Jesus is teaching us what it means to be a successful Christian. Now, last week, we saw how Peter recognized that Jesus was the Christ. And that meant that at last, this indestructible, powerful kingdom was at hand. But notice how Jesus keeps repeating the same thing over and over again. The Son of Man will suffer, will die. So despite Jesus trying to explain to them that this kingdom is not what they thought, they kept ignoring that because the passion of jealousy and ambition had already overcome their thoughts, their emotion. They were being consumed to the point where all they could do was talk about who would have the best position in this kingdom. Now, imagine that walk to that house. Through the Galilee, they're walking to this house. And they were starting to get frustrated with one another and with Jesus. I imagine one of them thinking, why would Jesus reveal his identity to Peter and not me? What does he have that I don't? He's just a fisherman. I'm the accountant, I'm the tax collector, I've got more education, I have more capabilities than he does to be able to be a leader in this kingdom. I am more fit. Why doesn't Jesus seem to notice me the same way he notices him? What do I have to do to be on top? Now, Jesus could sense the danger in this attitude that was beginning to emerge in them. So many dynasties and empires, political systems and kingdoms have come and gone in the history of humanity. Kingdoms that rise out of this ambition to be the greatest, only to fall, because someone will eventually come, overpower you. So humanity is in this constant frustration to be on top, meaning that we're constantly at war with each other. Doesn't stop. Now, Jesus knew that if the kingdom that he was going to establish was to be truly successful, that it would have no end, as we profess in our creed every Sunday, then something in them had to change. Their perception, their worldview, their idea of what it meant to be successful had to be flipped upside down. Better yet, right side up. To start with, the fact that Jesus chose the 12 says something about what he is doing differently. They were misfits, not what you would necessarily consider kingdom-building material. Any CEO today would laugh at his selection. Yet Jesus could see in them something different, something that we normally are blind to because of what we expect, which is why Jesus doesn't get frustrated with them. Instead, Jesus patiently, time and time again, sits them down, says, okay, let's try this again. This time brings a child in the middle. A child. You know, in their society, just like in ours, success was measured in a person's achievements. And children and servants were considered worthless because they contributed absolutely nothing to society. So they had no rights and they had no social status. And they were fully dependent on either their fathers or in servants, their masters, in order to be provided for. Now, this vulnerable status of both children and servants were the perfect example for Jesus' new virtues that he was bringing to the world, which is why Jesus constantly uses this image of servants and children in his teachings. In this case, the child that he is bringing is an example of the attitude that he was asking the disciples to adopt, the attitude of full dependency on God. And it's actually a very funny scene. Jesus is in a way insulting them in a nice way. Jesus was in a way snapping them to reality, saying, don't think of yourself highly. Don't think that I have chosen you because you are capable. I chose you because you are just like this child. None of you have a prominent place in society. A tax collector? A fisherman? I am choosing you, not because I am interested in your capabilities. You have none. I am choosing you because just like this child, you are also vulnerable. What is your vulnerable status? You're a sinner. What makes you capable, being a sinner is what makes you capable of realizing that you need to depend on God, not yourself. And doing that is what's going to save you from yourself. That is what Jesus is trying to do with them. From a scale of 1 to 10, how good of a sinner are you? I'm a pretty solid 10. Sometimes I can go down to maybe a 7, 6 in a good day. Pretty solid 10 though. How good of a sinner are you? It's a very interesting point of view, because this changes how we measure the success of a good Christian. In a scale of 1 to 10, how good of a Christian are you today? Because that also toggles. Some days we're better Christians than others. If Gandhi came to our parish to visit, would he be impressed or disappointed? What do you think? If the success of Christianity was measured in the quality of the character of the believer, then Gandhi was right. We're not very good Christians. However, I would argue that he missed the point. As good of a humanitarian as he was measuring success the same way that we tend to measure worldly success in everything that we do, based on personal achievement, based on personal character. But Jesus sees in us something different. So the success and beauty of the Christian body of believers, which we are, is not measured in how joyful we can be and how perfect we can be all the time. God knows we're a mixed bag. Some days we're better than others. The success and beauty of being a Christian comes in our recognition, first of all, that we are sinners and that we need to be in church precisely because we're not good Christians on our own, and we need to fully depend on God's grace. You know, that is something that Pope Francis has been trying to remind us of very strongly. That we are here partaking in the Eucharist, not because it is a reward for good behavior. Otherwise, I don't think any of us would be receiving the Eucharist at all. But because we are people in need of God's grace. Recently, he really came up with strong statements saying that no one should be denied communion. No Catholic should ever be denied communion. Even politicians who their stance might be completely against teaching. Why? Because conversion of heart for all of us begins with that need of the grace of God. Sure, that should always lead us and move us towards greater character, greater virtue, but it begins there. It begins there. In that case, that makes all of us here perfect candidates to be Christians. And even in our worst of moments, in a scale of 1 to 10, that should make us pretty joyful.